Hello everyone and welcome back to JB's Total Gaming. I know it's been a while since we've done board gaming or miniature gaming content, but we're going to get back into it some more again here, and we're going to talk about Armada. I did a video for Star Wars Armada a while ago, got some positive feedback, but then I didn't really get an opportunity to play it, but recently I've been able to get back into it and play on an almost weekly basis, so I'd like to do quite a bit of content for that, but I figured I'd start with some tutorial videos, because when I was looking at tutorial videos, not that they're bad out there, but even though this game's been out for a while, I thought that maybe I'd give a shot at doing some of it, and we'll cover some of the basics. We'll cover each individual aspect of it so that there isn't a super long video because there's a lot to the game. And we're not going to cover every single rule and edge case, but to give new players a kind of good idea of how things start out. And to start out, we're going to be talking about the cards and kind of the fleet building mechanism of the game, because in order to understand how ships move and how they attack and all that, we need to understand what's on the cards. Now, this is the most basic of the things in the game and probably the easiest to understand because, well, if you feel like you have a good concept of how the cards work and what they say and whatever, feel free to skip this video and move on if you want to. But let's go ahead and get into it, into the ships and the squadrons and the upgrade cards and all that stuff and how it works and how you actually make a fleet to go out and fight. Alright, first things first, let's talk about the ship cards. So, in Armada, the main thing we're going to have are ships and squadrons, and ships are these full-size things like this, whereas squadrons are going to be these little groups of individual fighters. And when we look at a ship card, we're going to see lots of different things. We're going to see how many hull points it has. We're going to see how it attacks against ships. We're going to see what defense tokens it has, which are represented by these things that have the matching symbols. We're going to see how it maneuvers. We're going to see its different stats, like its command, which is how many command dials a ship has, and also how many command tokens that the ship can have. If you don't know what any of that means, don't worry, we'll get to it. Its squadrons, so how many squadrons it can command when it commands squadrons, and its engineering value, which is basically how good it is at repairing itself. It will also show you the dice that the ship can fire when it fires. So if the ship is firing out of its front arc, it can fire 2 red dice and 2 black dice. Now we'll get into attacking, but these are based on distances as well. Black dice can only be fired at short range, blue and medium, and red at long. But we'll get into how all that works. We can also see the starting shield values for the ship. 3 in the front, 2 on the side, so on and so forth. So whenever you put your ship together, you want to make sure that this cardboard piece lines up with the way that the ship is facing, and then on the front of these ships are these things where the maneuver dial fits into, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. So to make sure your ship is assembled correctly, make sure this maneuver dial kind of notches in the front, that the cardboard is lined up with the ship that way, the name will be there on the back. And another thing you want to keep in mind is that there are 2 cards for every ship. So another couple of things that we'll see on these ships we'll get into is its upgrade bar that shows what sort of upgrades a ship can have and its point value. So if we look at these 2 ships, in general, when you're building a fleet, you have to be under a certain point value. So this ship costing 56 while the other one costs 62 is a big difference. And if we look at the 2 ships side by side, we can see some major differences. Like, for example, this ship having a red dice out of its side arcs, which makes it a little bit better, well, quite a bit better at longer ranges, because this only has close range on the side arcs. We can also see 2 dice that it fires against squadrons. So there are some important differences to bear in mind, and you can compare these things when deciding what sort of ship you want to use. And in later videos, we may talk about what sort of roles ships may be used for, but those are important things to keep in mind, that there are 2 different cards for every ship in the game. Now, let's move on and talk about what we see on the squadron cards. Now, squadrons function quite a bit differently than ships. Now, we can see they have a movement value. Now, the ships themselves have different speeds that could possibly move. Squadrons' movement is a little bit more simplified. They don't have to worry about turning. They can go in any direction up to a certain speed. They also have a hull value, but they don't have shields, and they have a value that they fire against other ships, and then or other squadrons, and a value they fire against ships. In general, they can only fire within range 1, but again, we'll get into attacking and all of that when we move on to the actual attacking video. Now, squadrons also tend to have 2 different card types. They tend to have one kind of generic card and then one card that's more specialized. It costs more in point value. So you can see a 12-point value here and a 21 here. Now you can see again the dice are different. It rolls more dice against enemy ships. It also has an ability that, and we won't get into this again into the attacking video, but it basically makes it more effective when attacking. And also these special ships can, or these special squadrons, excuse me, can have defense tokens. So much like the big ships, these special ones can also have defense tokens, basically making them more survivable. Now the big thing about squadrons, again, we'll get into how they work and all of that during the attacking, but one thing you want to bear in mind is you can bring as many advanced ties or whatever generic sort of ship you're talking about. But if you're talking about a unique squadron, so for example, you see this little dot here next to Darth Vader, that's showing that this is a unique squadron. Obviously, there's only one Darth Vader, so you can only bring one ship designated as Darth Vader into a match. So as many points as you can fit into a fight, you can bring as many of these advanced ties as you want to into a fight. And we see here, this is their hull points that we can tick down on here. But because each individual squadron keeps track of their damage individually, you can have just one card for as many of these that you bring into the fight. Now, if you bring in Darth Vader, however, you can see that he has his own special thing where he actually has his picture down there, and we can turn it a little bit so you can see it better, to delineate that this is Darth Vader's ship. But again, you can only have one of those because it is a unique squadron. There is one other type of squadron card in the game, these specialized squadrons. Now, this one is also a unique one with Dengar. But basically, there are squadrons in the game that only consist of one ship, but they still function on the same base, and they still function by all the same rules that squadrons do. Now next we want to talk about upgrade cards. Now we can see down here at the bottom of the card that there are these 4 different symbols here, and they may be kind of hard to see, but basically these are the types and number of upgrades that a ship can have. Some ships actually have more than one of each individual, of some of these individual icons, but they are important because they determine what sort of upgrades you can put on a ship. Now there are some specialized cards, like for example a title. So if we see here the Demolisher here, this says, during your activation, you can perform one of your attacks after you execute a maneuver. We'll get into maneuvering and attacking and all that, but normally in the game you have to attack before you move. And you can do 2 attacks. This allows you to attack, move, and then do another attack. This is a very powerful title. Now the thing about these title cards is many of them are unique. So I could run 2 of this Gladiator 1 sort of ships, but I can only run one named the Demolisher. So that's another thing to keep in mind, and a ship can only have one title, kind of obviously. Now, if we look at some of these other cards here, so Ordnance Experts, while you attack, you may reroll any number of black dice. Well, that's pretty good on a ship that has a bunch of black dice, and actually this setup is a pretty common thing to have. This Assault Concussion Missiles, again, this icon lines up with this icon, that allows us to have a special critical effect, which we'll get into during the attacking on black dice. So again, on a ship with a lot of black dice, that's pretty good. And engine techs allow us to basically do an additional maneuver. So this is a pretty common way to set up a Gladiator ship. It makes it a pretty powerful attacking ship using this combination of things. But again, we'll get in, if you don't really understand how all that works yet, we'll get into moving, attacking, and all of that. But all of these icons line up with icons that we can have on here. Now there are a couple other special cards that I want to get into. So let's talk about our commander. Whenever you want to have a valid fleet to bring to a fight, let's say you're playing with 300 total point value. Well, you can't go over 300 points. And again, these upgrade cards also have points on them. And you need to have a commander. So Admiral Screed, he is an Imperial commander. Another rule, obviously, you can only have Imperial cards and ships and squadrons in an Imperial fleet. Now, there are neutral cards. A lot of these cards don't have an Imperial or Rebel symbol on them on the upgrade cards. That's fine, but every ship or squadron is going to have them. And some certain cards are going to have, like, for example, an Imperial symbol here. So, obviously, the commanders are only for one side or another. Now, the commander goes on one of your ships, and that becomes your flagship. Every squad that you, fleet that you bring has to have a commander. You can only have one. What's really cool about commanders is that they give their special ability to all the ships in the fleet, not just the ship they're on. However, if they die, well, then that is gone. And also, there are some cards that aren't commanders that have, like, Imperial only. So, for example, Captain Nita, again, this is a unique card. He was in the Empire, so obviously you can only use this with an Imperial fleet. But, however, a lot of these cards don't have any symbol, so you can use these for any ship that has that matching icon. So now let's talk about what makes an overall legal fleet in order to bring into the game. Well, when you start out, you may want to play with some smaller numbers, as small as maybe 200 or 300 points or something like that. Now, I have, coming up in a couple of days, a 300-point game, or 350-point game, excuse me, against a friend. That's a number we just arbitrarily decided to play on. So you'd add up all of the points onto things, make sure everything is legal. So here we have a legal fleet. Now, I'll also show off the squadrons that I'm bringing. But we have upgrade cards that match up with everything. I only have one title on there. I have a commander. He's going to be on this ship. And again, we can get into in later videos what all of these cards may be good for. But everything lines up with what we're going to do here. And then I'm going to bring 2 Lambda-class shuttles that we can bring because, again, this is not unique. So we can bring as many of those as we want. We're going to bring Dengar and we're going to bring Darth Vader. So here we have around 350 points fleet that we're going to bring. We have a commander. Everything lines up pretty well. I'm not going to get into the strategy or whatever as to why this fleet may be good or whatever, because honestly, I've only recently started playing the game again, and then it may not be that good of a strategy. Now, there is one other aspect to a legal fleet, though, and I'm only going to cover it briefly and not all that much, because this is going to be something we'll probably cover more in a later video. But there are these cards, these kind of objectives, and whenever you make a legal fleet in the game, you probably don't want to use these, or maybe even use a random one for your first game or couple of games playing the game. But basically, you're going to want to pick one of these red cards, one of these yellow cards, and one of these light blue cards, and that is actually part of what you bring to a match using the full rule set. And you want to find cards of these that match well with your fleet. And basically, whoever has the lower points get to determine who goes first, but whoever is going second basically makes the first player choose from these cards. I think I said that correctly. But basically, these cards a lot of times give the second player an advantage. Like maybe they get to set up after the first player, or there's all different kinds of things, or things where maybe there's an intel sweep, I believe, where you want to have small ships that are very maneuverable or something like that. So yeah, this is the one where I think you set up afterwards. So there's going to be certain things where you see down here, there's a point value on some of these cards and not on others, not on others or others. So how this works is all of these have, set up in special rules and things like that, but some of them have an objective, and when you do a certain thing, then you get basically a token, and then at the end of the game that token is worth that many points, and then you also get points for destroying ships to include all the upgrade cards and things like that on the ships. But again, we'll get into all of that later. But technically, if you want the full rules of a legal fleet, that is important. Another thing to bear in mind is when it comes to squadrons, you can have a maximum of 1/3 of your points in squadrons. So if you have an exactly 300-point squadron, you can't have any more, or 300-point fleet, you can't have any more than 100-point squadrons. So that should give you a pretty good idea of how the cards actually work, what makes up a legal fleet. And in the next video, we'll get into commands and movements. There's quite a bit that goes on to that, and then we'll talk about attacking, because that in and of itself is a fairly complicated thing. Then after all that, we'll be able to break down the turn structure and get into maybe some more complicated videos. But thanks a lot for watching. Again, I know this was kind of a basic video, maybe some pretty easy to understand things, but it'll be beneficial in understanding the things later on. And if you're not sure if you want to check out Armada, hopefully this will give you a pretty good idea of how it plays and maybe help you decide if it's something you want to check out. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.